In the autumn of 1867, nestled deep within the damp, shadowed folds of the West Country, there stood a manor known as Ashgrove Hall, grey limestone veined with moss. Its windows long since shuttered against the gaze of the world. The estate lay 4 miles from the nearest village, Dalmir, a cluster of cottages huddled around a crooked spire and a well that tasted faintly of iron. Ashgrove had once been a place of modest gentry distinction, its name appearing with quiet regularity in parish records and land deeds, but by the time of Queen Victoria's Silver Jubilee, it had receded into local legend, spoken of only in lowered voices and with a certain tightening about the eyes. The last of the Ashgrove line was Lady Eleanor Vane, a woman whose beauty, as so the aged vicar of Downmere would later recall, was of that peculiar English kind, composed, pale, and unervingly still, like water beneath ice. She inherited the estate at 23, following the sudden deaths of her father and 2 elder brothers within the span of a single fortnight of fever. The doctor had called it, though no one else in the household sickened, and the servants whispered of the way the brothers' beds had been found cold, despite the hearths burning through the night. Eleanor remained alone, save for her 3 younger sisters Clara, Beatrice, and little Marian, who vanished from public view almost immediately after the funeral. At first, this caused little remark. Mourning customs were strict, and the Vanes had always kept to themselves. But as the seasons turned, and no invitations were issued, no carriages rolled up the overgrown drive, no letters posted with the Downmere seal, the silence began to curdle. Villagers reported glimpses through the trees, a pale hand at an upper window, a figure pacing the east gallery long after midnight, the soft glint of candlelight where none should have been lit. The gamekeeper who once tended Ashgrove's grounds claimed he heard singing 3 voices in unison, weaving a lullaby he did not recognize in nights when the fog lay thick over the marshes. These reports were dismissed as the fancies of an aging man, yet they lingered like the scent of damp wool in a sealed room. Lady Eleanor continued to receive deliveries: flour, candles, coal, always paid for with crisp banknotes left in a lacquered box at the gate. She never appeared in person. When the rector called to offer spiritual comfort, he was met by a locked door and a voice precise, unmistakably hers, thanking him through the keyhole, assuring him that all within were well tended and at peace. The villagers, practical folk hardened by decades of poor harvests and infant mortality, might have let the matter rest were it not for the silence. Not merely the absence of sound, but a quality of hush that seemed to press outward from the manor itself, as if the very air around Ashgrove had grown dense with withheld breath. Windows that once reflected the sun now swallowed light, and birds avoided the ancient oaks that flanked the drive. Children dared one another to touch the gatepost, then ran shrieking back, claiming their fingers came away numb. Still, nothing overtly unnatural occurred. No screams, no blood, no spectral figures, only the slow, relentless withdrawal of 4 women from the fabric of time. The inheritance, it seemed, had come with terms no one had read aloud. Years passed, and Ashgrove Hall sank further into obscurity, its stone walls softening under layers of ivy, its gardens surrendering to the encroaching brambles. Then, in the spring of 1883, a trunk surfaced at a solicitor's office in bound in tarnished brass, bearing the Vane crest beneath a coating of mildew. It had been sent anonymously, with no return address, accompanied only by a single sheet of paper inscribed in a spidery hand, "For those who seek truth, not gossip." Inside lay the remnants of a life meticulously preserved, and yet deliberately concealed. 3 journals, bound in faded blue cloth, a pressed sprig of white lilac wrapped in tissue, a set of ivory-handled hairbrushes still threaded with strands of auburn and chestnut hair, and a small music box whose mechanism, too grusted, retained the ghost of a melody. The journals belonged to Clara, the eldest of the vanished sisters, and their pages, though brittle with age, revealed a mind of uncommon clarity and mounting distress. She wrote of routine, at first morning prayers, needlework, readings from Cooper and Milton, but soon the entries grew thinner, the ink paler, as if written under exhaustion or fear. Eleanor believes the world outside is unclean, she noted in an entry dated October 1871. She says, "We are safer here, where memory holds us pure. But I hear the wind speak through the eaves, and it does not sound like wind." Later, she described the locking of doors, not just the great oak at the front, but the internal ones too. Clara's chamber sealed from the outside each night, the key turning with a sound like a bone snapping. There were references to the pact, though never its nature, only its weight. We gave our word before Father's body grew cold. To break it would be worse than death, so, she says. And I believe her. For her, eyes have changed. Interspersed among these entries were precise renderings of the sisters' hands, clasped together, their faces blurred as though the artist dared not look too closely. Most unsettling was a recurring notation. They come when the clocks stop. The household possessed 7 timepieces, all wound daily by Eleanor herself. Yet Clara recorded, with increasing agitation, instances when every clockard and father mantle ceased at precisely 3:17 a.m. and would not restart until dawn. During those intervals, she wrote, the house breathed differently, and Marian would weep without sound, her mouth open but no voice emerging. The music box, when later examined by her, was found to play a fragment of the Ashgrove, a Welsh folk tune, but altered certain notes, sharpened, others omitted so that the melody carried an uncanny dissonance, like a lullaby sung backward in sleep. Villagers questioned long after the fact recalled that Marian, the youngest, had once possessed a sweet soprano, and that on rare occasions, before the seclusion, she had sung that very tune beneath the old yew tree. Now, the box sat silent, yet those who handled it reported a faint vibration in the wood, as if something within still strained to turn. A local clergyman, summoned once on vague pretext by Eleanor herself, later confided to his diary that he had seen Marian standing at the top of the great staircase during his brief visit, her nightgown translucent in the lamplight, but, when he blinked, the landing was empty, and Eleanor claimed the girl had been confined to her room with a fever. The journals ended abruptly in the winter of 1875. Mid-sentence. She says they are watching through the mirrors, and I think the rest was torn away, the paper cleanly sewn, as though excised with surgical precision. The solicitor who received the trunk, a man not given to fancy, kept it locked in his vault for months before forwarding it to the county archives, noting in his ledger only, papers of melancholy import, handled with gloves. Even the lilac sprig, when later examined under magnification, showed no sign of decay. Its petals retained a ghostly pallor. It scent faintly sweet, yet cold, like air drawn from a sealed tomb. These artifacts, fragmentary and fragile though they were, formed the first tangible breach in the silence surrounding Ash, not by revealing what had occurred within its walls, but by proving that something had been hidden with deliberate, almost devotional care. The unease they stood was not that of the supernatural alone, but of a rational mind forced to confront a logic that operated beyond its grasp, a logic of loyalty, fear, and inheritance, fused into something neither wholly human nor entirely spectral, but enduring. These discoveries, though fragmentary, stirred the quiet academic circles of Oxford and Cambridge, where the boundaries between folklore and pathology were often debated over port and cigars. Among those intrigued was Dr. Alistair Finch, a physician with a growing reputation in the nascent field of psychical research and a particular interest in cases where domestic seclusion bordered on the pathological. Finch, a man of methodical habits and restrained curiosity, traveled to Downmere in the late summer of 1885, carrying with him not only the journals, but a letter of introduction from the Royal Society. He interviewed the few remaining servants who had served under Lady Eleanor, now elderly, scattered, and reluctant to speak. One former maid, Signora Elisa Poole, agreed to meet him in the dim parlor of a Downmere Inn, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes never quite meeting his. She recalled that meals were left outside each sister's door on silver trays, collected hours later, with plates untouched or scraped clean with unnatural haste. Lady Eleanor said they were fasting for spiritual clarity, Mrs. Poole murmured, but I saw Miss Beatrice once through the crack of a pantry garage. She passed by. Her cheeks were hollow, her dress hanging like a shroud, yet her eyes, bright, too bright, as if lit from behind. Another servant, the old groundskeeper, spoke of hearing footsteps in the east wing, long after the family had retired 3 sets, always in sequence, pacing the same corridor for hours. Most troubling was the testimony of a postman, now retired, who claimed that on the anniversary of the brothers' deaths each year, a sealed envelope would appear in the village postbox, addressed to the three sisters, Ashgrove Hall, though no sender was ever identified, and the postmark always read London, 1867. The letters were never collected, yet each year a new one arrived, until 1879, when the postbox was found empty on that date for the first time. Finch cross-referenced parish burial records and discovered that all three Beatrice and Marion had been interred in the Ashgrove family plot in 1878, their deaths certified by a physician whose signature matched no known registry. Yet no funeral had been held, no mourners gathered, and the grave markers were unadorned, bearing only initials. More perplexing still, the death certificates listed no cause unlead the press, peaceful release, inscribed in the margin in Eleanor's unmistakable script. Finch Eberkotus sought physical corroboration. Accompanied by the parish sexton, he visited the family plot at dusk. The soil above the three graves showed no sign of recent disturbance. Yet when a shallow probe was inserted near Marion's marker, it struck not earth, but wood smooth, dry, and unmistakably the lid of a coffin. The sexton, superstitious but honest, refused to dig deeper, muttering that the dead looked after their own. Finch returned to the hall under moonlight, hoping to observe Eleanor's ritual, if any, from Akopsa beaches. He watched as a single candle flickered in the east gallery, the same window from which villagers had once glimpsed a pale hand. At precisely 3:14 a.m., the candle was extinguished. 3 minutes later, a low hum vibrated through the still air, faint but resonant, like the ghost of a tuning fork struck deep within the house. It lasted less than 10 seconds, then ceased. Finch noted in his field journal, not mechanical, not vocally yet harmonized, as though three voices sustained a single note and released it in unison. He attempted to enter the manor the following day under pretense of inspecting structural damage from recent rains. Eleanor received him in the morning room, her posture impeccable, her voice She denied any knowledge of the journal's existence, called the postbox letters a villager's prank, and insisted her sisters had succumbed to consumption, buried quietly to spare the family further grief. Yet when Finch mentioned the humming, her teacup tilted ever so slightly, spilling a single drop onto her black silk lap. She did not, blotted by Kinnock's Ford. Finch compiled his evidence with clinical rigor, testimonies aligned too precisely to be dismissed as collective delusion. The burial records defied bureaucratic norms. The sonic phenomenon defied acoustical explanation. He consulted experts in neurology who suggested mass hysteria or inherited melancholia, theologians who spoke of vows unto death, antiquarians who noted that Ashgrove's foundations rested on land once consecrated to a pre-Reformation chantry, where perpetual prayers for the dead were once offered. None of these explanations satisfied the coherence of what he had observed, the sense of design, of continuity, of a system operating just beyond perception. Most unnerving was the realization that Eleanor had not broken under isolation. Rather, she had thrived within it, as though the withdrawal from society had not been a punishment but a consummation. Finch began to dream of clocks stopping in unison, of three figures standing motionless in a corridor whose end receded with every step he took. He ceased attending society dinners. His notes grew more elliptical. They are not dead. They are kept. He never published his full findings. The Royal Society archived his report under unverified domestic anomalies, where it gathered dust for decades. But in a locked drawer of his desk, he kept one final item retrieved during his last visit, a child's hair ribbon, found snagged on a nail in Marion's doorway. It smelled faintly of lilac and candle wax. He would hold it before sleep, not out of scientific inquiry, but because, in the silence of his rooms, it sometimes felt warm. Finch's investigations, though published in a modest journal of abnormal psychology, might have faded into obscurity had they not caught the eye of Miss Helen Thorne, a journalist of independent means and formidable intellect, who made it her life's work to chronicle England's forgotten tragedies. In 1891, armed with Finch's notes and a quiet determination that bordered on compulsion, Thorne journeyed to Ashgrove Hall, now half swallowed by the encroaching forest. The manor was not. Abandoned smoke still curled from one chimney, and fresh linen hung stiffly in an upper window. But it was clear that occupancy was minimal, spectral. Over weeks of patient surveillance, she observed Lady Eleanor only once. A gaunt figure in black, standing at the threshold of the rose garden at twilight, her face turned not toward the setting sun, but toward the darkening trees, as if listening. Thorn gained entry not by force, but by subterfuge, posing as a distant relative seeking genealogical records. Eleanor, older now, her hair white, though she was scarcely 50, received her in the library, a room lined with books whose spines had never been cracked. The conversation was brief, courteous, and utterly devoid of warmth. When Thorn mentioned the sisters' journals, Eleanor's expression did not change, but her hand tightened around the silver letter opener she held, the knuckles bleaching. They chose their peace, she said, and would say no more. Undeterred, Thorn returned under cover of night, slipping through a loose cellar grate. Inside, she found not the decay one might expect, but a house preserved in eerie stasis. Teacups on saucers, gloves laid neatly on a chaise, a child's shoe beside a bed. Dust lay thick, yet undisturbed, as though no foot had passed through in years yet. The hearth in the east parlor held cold ash arranged in perfect symmetry, as if raked with ritual care. In the sisters' adjoining chambers, the beds were made with hospital precision, the counterpanes drawn taut, the pillows uncreased. On Marian's nightstand rested a porcelain doll with glass eyes reflecting the moonlight, its dress stitched from the same fabric as the gown she wore in a photograph Thorn had seen in Finch's files. Most telling was the state of the clocks. All 7 remained in place, their hands frozen at 3:17. Thorn wound one gently. It resisted, then gave with a shudder, its chime emitting a single cracked note before falling silent again. In a locked escritoire in the east wing Itzky, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, she discovered a final document, a notarized vow, dated the day after the brothers' burial, signed by all 4 sisters in blood so dark it had turned nearly black. It read, in part, "We bind ourselves to this house and to each other, that no vain woman shall walk the world alone, nor let the name fall to male hands again. Let our lives be hidden, our voices stilled, our forms kept whole and memories keeping. Beneath it, in Eleanor's hand, they are with me still. They always will be." Tucked behind the parchment was its silver surface clouded but intact. The 4 sisters standing in the gallery, arms linked, their faces serene yet. Clara's eyes were closed, Beatrice's hand transparent at the edge, and Marian's feet did not quite touch the floor. Thorn left Ashgrove before dawn, her hands trembling not from fear but from the terrible clarity of what she had uncovered. She never published her findings. Instead, she sealed her notes in wax and bequeathed them to the Bodleian, with instructions that they'd not be opened until a century had passed. She wrote in her private diary, "Some truths are not meant to be known. Only Borne." In the years that followed, she avoided all writing on haunted houses or focusing instead on famine relief and women's education, as though attempting to anchor herself firmly in the tangible world. Yet acquaintance noted a change. She would start at the sound of a clock striking 3, and once, during a dinner party, she abruptly excused herself upon hearing a guest hum a fragment of the Ash Grove. She died in 1912. Unmarried, her rooms filled with maps and ledgers, but above her writing desk hung a single pressed sprig of white lilac, preserved under glass. Her will specified that her personal effects be burned, save for one item, a silver hairpin engraved with the initials MV, which she left to no one, and which vanished from her estate inventory without explanation. Those who handled her papers after her death reported a faint scent of candle wax and an unsettling sense of being watched from the corners of the room, though they dismissed it as grief or fatigue. But in the margins of her final notebook, in a hand grown frail yet steady, she had written, "They are not gone. They are waiting. And waiting is a kind of living." The final revelation came not in words, but in absence. When the Bodleian archives were finally unsealed in 1991, researchers found Thorn's notes intact, along with a small velvet pouch containing 3 hairpins twisted like vines and a single page torn from a ledger. listing payments made annually to a firm of London watchmakers for the repair of 7 timepieces. Ashgrove Hall. The ledger bore the notation: client requires all clocks to strike simultaneously at 3:17 a.m., no deviation permitted. By then, Ashgrove Hall had long since crumbled, its stones scavenged by farmers, its grounds returned to pasture. Yet local residents still speak of the R37. On certain windless nights, a silence falls so complete that even the owls cease their calling, and in that silence, if one stands near the old gatepost, one might hear it. Not a voice, not a footstep, but the faintest echo of 3 breaths drawn in unison. As if Whiting, the land where the manor once stood, now belongs to a dairy farmer, a pragmatic man named Thomas Preece, who allows no one to linger near the old foundation stones, though he cannot say why. He claims the ground there stays cold, and that his cows refuse to graze within 30 yards of the yew tree's remnants. In 1998, a graduate student from Exeter, drawn by the archival material, visited Price seeking permission to survey the site. Reluctantly, the farmer agreed, on condition she leave before dusk. She set up her instruments near the collapsed east wing, where Thorne's notes indicated the sisters' chambers had been. As twilight deepened, her audio recorder left running to capture ambient sound, picked up nothing for hours. Then, at precisely 3:17 a.m., a low resonance, barely above the threshold of hearing, like 3 tuning forks, struck in perfect harmony and allowed to fade. When played back at amplified speed, spectral analysis revealed a pattern: 3 overlapping sine waves, each subtly distinct in pitch, sustaining for 11 seconds before dissolving into white noise. More curiously, when transcribed into musical notation, the intervals formed a minor triad, rooted in Gia, chord long, associated in folk tradition with lamentation and unresolved sorrow. The student, though a skeptic by training, reported that upon hearing the playback, she felt an overwhelming sense of being observed, not from behind, but from within the silence, between notes. She never returned. What remains today is not a haunting in the vulgar sense. No apparitions, no rattling chains, but a quiet distortion in the air around the site, as though time itself hesitates there. Villagers tell of children who, after playing too near the old gate, fall into trances, murmuring names they could not possibly know. One boy, in 1953, was found sitting beneath the skeletal yew at dawn, cradling a porcelain doll with glass eyes, though no such object had been seen on the property in 80 years. When asked where he found it, he replied simply, "She gave it to me," and would say no more. The doll disappeared from the police station within a day, leaving only a faint scent of lilac on the evidence table. These incidents are never officially recorded. They exist only in whispered anecdotes, in the tightening of lips when Ashgrove is mentioned at market. And yet, for all its strangeness, the truth may be simple and more terrible than any spectre. Perhaps the sisters never left because they were never allowed to. Perhaps Eleanor's vow was not metaphor but execution, a binding so absolute that life, once surrendered to memory, became indistinguishable from its preservation. In a world that valued female inheritance only as a vessel for male legacy, the Vanes chose erasure over dispersal, unity over exposure. They locked themselves away not from fear of the world, but from the world's demand that they be divided, diminished, married off. In Tadlight, the clocks stopping at 3:17 may not mark a visitation, but a vigilant eternal refusal to let time carry them apart. The breaths heard in the silence are not ghosts, but echoes of a choice made in grief and love, sustained by will alone. To this day, on still nights in Downmere, if the wind dies just after 3, and the fields lie hushed beneath a waning moon, one might stand at the edge of what was once Ashgrove's drive and feel it. Not cold, not fear, but the weight of a presence held in perfect balance, 3 souls folded into memory, kept whole by the last sister's unwavering gaze. And if you listen closely, beneath the pulse of your own blood, you may hear the faintest whisper of a music box, its melody no longer dissonant, but resolved at last not in death, but in the quiet, unbroken chord of belonging.